You know that famous footage, right? The one they show in every history documentary. The massive airship engulfing in flames. The reporter's voice cracking as he screams, "Oh, the humanity." But here's what they don't show you. They don't show the split second before, the moment when everything was perfect, when the most luxurious aircraft ever built was gliding gracefully toward its mooring mast, and 97 souls on board were thinking about dinner, about seeing their families, about stepping onto solid ground after 3 days floating across the Atlantic Ocean. I was one of those 97 people, and I'm going to tell you exactly what it felt like to be inside the Hindenburg when it caught fire. Not the sanitized history book version, not the grainy newsreel footage you've seen 100 times. I'm talking about the smell, the sounds, the impossible choices people had to make in the span of seconds. The things I saw that still wake me up at night, more than 8 decades later. Because here's the thing about disasters. They don't happen in slow motion like the movies. They happen in a blur of confusion and terror and split-second decisions that mean the difference between life and death. So buckle up. This is the story they never taught you in school. Let me take you back to May 3rd, 1937. If you weren't alive then, you can't understand what the Hindenburg meant to the world. You just can't. Today, we hop on planes like we're catching a bus. Back then, flying across the ocean was something only the extremely wealthy or extremely brave even considered, and the Hindenburg wasn't just any aircraft. Oh no, this thing was a palace in the sky. Imagine the Titanic, but floating 650 feet above the ocean, moving at 84 miles per hour. We're talking about an airship that was 804 feet long, longer than 3 Boeing 747s parked end to end. It had a dining room with fine china and crystal, a lounge with a baby grand piano, a smoking room. Yes, a smoking room on a ship filled with 7 million cubic feet of hydrogen gas, because the Germans were just that confident in their engineering. The ticket price? About $400 one way from Germany to the United States. That's roughly $8,000 in today's money. Each way, so yeah, this wasn't budget travel. This was the absolute pinnacle of luxury, technology, and human achievement. This was the future of transportation, or so everyone thought. I'd saved for 2 years to afford my ticket. 2 years of putting aside every spare penny, eating cheap meals, wearing the same 3 suits until they were practically threadbare. But it was worth it, because boarding the Hindenburg meant you were someone. It meant you'd arrived, literally and figuratively. The journey started in Frankfurt, Germany on May 3rd. We were scheduled for a routine transatlantic crossing, with our destination being Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. 3 days of floating across the Atlantic in unprecedented comfort and style. 3 days that would end in 37 seconds of hell. The first time you see the Hindenburg up close, your brain doesn't quite process it. It's too big, too impossibly massive. The thing just hangs there in the sky like it's defying every law of physics you've ever understood. The silver skin gleams in the sunlight, and you can see the Nazi swastikas on the tail fins, because yes, this was Nazi Germany's pride and joy, their technological showpiece to the world. I remember standing on the tarmac in Frankfurt, my neck craned back, my mouth literally hanging open. "First time?" said a voice next to me. I turned to see an older gentleman, impeccably dressed, with a knowing smile, distinguished-looking fellow with silver hair and a walking stick. "That obvious?" I replied. He chuckled. "I've made this crossing 4 times. You never quite get used to it. Come on, the boarding stairs are this way." That man's name was Colonel Fritz Erdmann. A businessman charming, spoke 5 languages fluently. He'd survived the disaster too, but just barely. When I saw him at the hospital afterward, half his body was covered in bandages, and he'd lost that walking stick somewhere in the wreckage. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The boarding process was surprisingly casual. You'd expect airport-style security, right? X-rays, pat-downs, all that. Nope. They checked your ticket, gave your luggage a quick glance to make sure you weren't bringing anything too heavy. Weight was crucial on an airship, and that was pretty much it. Oh, except for one thing, the matches. Before you could board, they confiscated any matches or lighters you had. Remember that smoking room I mentioned? That was the only place on the entire ship where flames were allowed, and they controlled it religiously. The room was pressurized to keep hydrogen from seeping in, and they had one crew member whose entire job was to tend the electric lighter that passengers used. They were that paranoid about fire. Kind of ironic, right? As I climbed the stairs into the passenger gondola, I felt this mix of excitement and nervousness. The stairs actually swayed a bit as you climbed. This massive airship was so light that it moved with the breeze like a balloon on a string. And then I stepped inside. The passenger areas were located inside the hull of the ship, but you'd never know it. The designers had created these beautiful spaces that felt more like a luxury hotel than an aircraft. The corridors were narrow, sure, but they were paneled in lightweight wood and decorated with artwork. My cabin was small, about the size of a train compartment, but it had a bed, a tiny sink, and a window. A window? Looking out at the clouds from inside an airship is something I still can't adequately describe. You're floating, completely silent except for the gentle hum of the engines. The ground is far below, but you're not enclosed in a metal tube like a modern airplane. You can open the window, stick your head out, feel the wind. It's the closest thing to being a bird I've ever experienced. The other passengers were an interesting mix. There were businessmen like Colonel Erdmann, a handful of American tourists heading home, some journalists, a few German officials. In total, there were 36 passengers on this flight, plus 61 crew members. That might seem like a lot of crew for 36 passengers, but you have to understand, flying an airship wasn't like flying a plane. It took dozens of men to control the gas cells, manage the ballast, steer the ship, cook the meals, tend to the passengers. It was more like operating a cruise ship than piloting an aircraft. We departed Frankfurt on schedule, May 3rd, 1937, at 7:16 p.m. local time. I stood at the window as the ground crew released the mooring lines and the Hindenburg lifted gently into the evening sky. No roar of jet engines, no rattling down a runway, just a smooth, almost eerie ascent into the darkening sky. As we rose above Frankfurt, I could see people on the ground looking up, waving. The Hindenburg was always an event. Whenever it flew over a city, people stopped what they were doing and stared. It was the closest thing to a UFO sighting you could have in 1937. Someone popped a bottle of champagne in the lounge. The journey had begun. Here's what nobody tells you about the Hindenburg. It was boring. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it was so smooth, so quiet, so stable that you literally forgot you were flying. You could set a glass of water on a table and it wouldn't spill. You could walk around like you were in a building. There was no turbulence to speak of, no sense of motion at all. It was surreal. The first night we had a formal dinner in the dining room. The tables were set with actual china, not plastic, not metal, but real porcelain. Crystal glasses, silver utensils. The stewards served us course after course. Soup, fish, roast beef, vegetables, wine, dessert. All while floating 500 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. I sat with a couple from New York who were returning from a vacation in Germany. The husband was a banker, couldn't stop talking about the economic situation in Europe, how things were getting tense, how he was glad to be heading back to the States. His wife was quieter, spent most of dinner looking out the windows at the sunset over the ocean. "It's like a dream," she kept saying. "It's like we're in a dream." She had no idea how right she was, how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares. After dinner, several passengers gathered in the lounge. This was the social heart of the ship, a large room with windows on both sides, tables scattered about, and that baby grand piano I mentioned. The walls were decorated with a large map showing the route from Frankfurt to Lakehurst, with a small model airship that the crew would move to show our current position. Someone was playing the piano. Chopin, I think. A few people were playing cards. Others just sat and looked out at the stars. I got talking with one of the crew members, a young guy named Hans. He was probably 24, 25 years old. Blonde hair, eager smile, proud as hell to be working on the Hindenburg. 12 round trips last year, he told me, his English heavily accented but understandable. Never a problem, not one problem. This ship, she is the safest aircraft ever built. What about the hydrogen? I asked. Doesn't that worry you? He shook his head vigorously. The Americans worry because of the Hindenburg's name, yes? They remember the explosion of hydrogen in the laboratories. But this is different. The gas cells, they are separate. The ship, she is designed with every safety. Fire cannot happen. But what if it did? I pressed. Hans laughed. Then we jump, yes? But it will not happen. Never has happened. Never will happen. 3 days later, Hans would be one of the 35 people who died. I don't know if he jumped or if he got trapped in the fire. I just know that when they published the list of casualties, his name was on it. But that first night, death was the furthest thing from anyone's mind. I went to bed around midnight, lulled to sleep by the gentle thrumming of the engines and the slight sway of the ship. My last thought before drifting off was how lucky I was to be experiencing this, how this was the trip of a lifetime. I had no idea how literally true that would turn out to be. The next 2 days were more of the same, magnificent, boring luxury. We'd wake up, have breakfast in the dining room, spend the day reading, chatting, playing games, looking out the windows, have lunch, more lounging around, dinner, some socializing in the lounge, bed. It sounds monotonous, but it was actually wonderful. There was something deeply peaceful about it. No phones ringing, no telegrams unless they were absolutely urgent, no rush, no stress. Just floating across the ocean at a leisurely pace, suspended between earth and sky. The crew was attentive, but not hovering. They seemed genuinely happy to be there, proud of their ship. Captain Max Pruss would occasionally walk through the passenger areas, asking if everyone was comfortable, if we needed anything. Pruss was a veteran airship captain. Oh, serious demeanor, professional to his core, but you could tell he loved the Hindenburg. The way he looked at the ship, the way he touched the walls as he walked through, it was like a sea captain with his vessel. He'd survived too, though badly burned. On the second day, we hit some weather over the Atlantic. Nothing serious. Some clouds, a bit of rain, but even that was fascinating from inside the Hindenburg. We'd rise above the storm and you could look down at the clouds, see the lightning flickering inside them like something alive. That banker's wife I mentioned? She spent hours at the windows that day just watching the storm. We're like gods, she said to me at one point, looking down at the weather from above. My grandparents crossed this ocean in a steamship. Took them 2 weeks, and they were sick the whole time. Now look at us. 3 days in perfect comfort, watching the storms from above. She paused, then added quietly, "It seems too good to be true, doesn't it?" I wish I'd paid more attention to that comment. By May 6th, the third and final day of our journey, everyone was getting a bit restless. The novelty of floating across the ocean had worn off, and people were ready to land. We were supposed to arrive at Lakehurst early in the morning, but strong headwinds had slowed us down. Then we got word that there were thunderstorms over the landing area, and we'd have to wait for them to clear. So we circled, and circled, and circled some more. For hours, we just flew in big loops around the New Jersey/New York area. Some passengers got frustrated. They had plans, people waiting for them, but most of us didn't mind. I mean, we were flying over New York City in an airship. You could see the buildings, the bridges, the Statue of Liberty. People on the ground were stopping to look up at us. Some were waving. We waved back. Around 4 p.m., Captain Pruss announced that the weather had cleared enough for us to attempt landing. We turned toward Lakehurst. The mood on board shifted from bored waiting to excited anticipation. Finally, we were almost there. The crew started preparing for landing. This was a complex operation. They had to vent hydrogen from the gas cells to reduce lift, adjust the ballast, position the ship perfectly for the ground crew to grab the mooring lines. I went to my cabin to gather my things. I didn't have much. A small suitcase, a leather satchel with some books and papers. I made sure everything was packed and ready to go. Then I went to one of the windows to watch the landing. This was it, the final minutes of an incredible journey. In a few minutes I'd be on solid ground, probably grabbing a taxi to Manhattan, checking into a hotel, starting my new life in America. I couldn't wait. We approached Lakehurst Naval Air Station at around 7 p.m. The landing field was huge, had to be, to accommodate the Hindenburg, and there was already a crowd gathered. There was always a crowd when the Hindenburg landed. It was a spectacle, an event. I could see the mooring mast in the center of the field, a tall steel structure that the Hindenburg would nose up to, allowing ground crew to secure it. Around the mast, I could see hundreds of Navy personnel in white uniforms ready to grab the landing lines. There were also spectators, journalists, newsreel cameramen. Families waiting for their loved ones to disembark. The approach seemed to take forever. We made several turns, circling the field, as Captain Pruss and his officers positioned the ship exactly right. The crew was rushing around, making final preparations. At 7:21 p.m., we made our final approach. The ship slowed to nearly a stop, hovering about 200 feet above the ground. The rear mooring lines dropped from the tail. These were manila ropes, thick as your arm. The ground crew grabbed them and started pulling us down and forward. Everything was going perfectly. I was standing near a window in the passenger lounge, my bags at my feet. A few other passengers were there too, watching. Some were already heading toward the gangway, ready to be first off. Colonel Erdmann was there, that walking stick in his hand, a big smile on his face. "Well," he said to me, "we made it. 3 days, 3,000 miles, and we made it." "We did," I replied. "You know what I'm going to do first?" he continued. "I'm going to find a good American steakhouse and have the biggest meal of my life. You're welcome to join me." "I might take you up on that," I said. "Good. Good. This trip, it changes you, doesn't it? Makes you realize what humans can achieve when we put our minds to..." And that's when I heard it. A sound. It's hard to describe. Not an explosion, not at first. More like a muffled thump. Like someone dropping a heavy sack of grain on a wooden floor. I felt the ship shudder slightly. Colonel Erdmann stopped mid-sentence and looked around. What was that? Several other passengers had heard it too. Everyone was looking around, confused. Then I heard something else. A strange rushing, roaring sound coming from above and behind us. Someone shouted in German. A crew member, his voice urgent, panicked. And then the stern of the ship began to drop. Not fast, not at first. Just a gradual tilting, like someone was pushing down on the tail. People grabbed onto tables, railings, anything to keep their balance. "What's happening?" someone yelled. I looked out the window, and I saw it. Fire. Brilliant, impossibly bright orange fire, blooming along the top of the ship near the tail. It was spreading forward, fast, consuming the silver skin of the Hindenburg like it was made of paper. "Oh my God," someone whispered. The tilt was getting steeper. The rear of the ship was falling faster now, and the nose was rising. We were maybe 150 feet off the ground, and the ship was rotating, tail dropping, nose pointing skyward. And that fire, it was growing, spreading, eating the ship alive. Everything happened at once after that. People screaming, crew members yelling orders in German, the groaning, screeching sound of the ship's structure bending and breaking. The roar of the fire, getting louder, closer. The ship was falling. We were falling, and there was fire everywhere. You've probably heard that the Hindenburg disaster lasted 37 seconds from first fire to the ship hitting the ground. 37 seconds. Let me tell you what 37 seconds feels like when you're inside a falling, burning airship. It feels like hours, like years, like your entire life playing out in horrible, crystal-clear slow motion. The initial tilt threw people off balance. Bags, luggage, furniture, everything that wasn't secured went sliding toward the rear of the ship. I grabbed onto a window frame, my feet scrambling for purchase on the floor that was rapidly becoming a wall. "Jump!" someone screamed. "Jump now!" Through the window, I could see the ground. We were maybe 80 feet up now, the tail falling fast. The fire was spreading along the top of the ship, and I could feel the heat starting to penetrate the interior. Some people did jump. I saw one man, I don't know who he was, throw himself through a window. He fell, tumbled, hit the ground hard. I don't know if he survived. Colonel Erdmann was still next to me, gripping a table with both hands, his walking stick forgotten. "We have to get out," I yelled at him. "How?" he shouted back. "We're too high." He was right. We were still too far up to jump safely, but staying inside meant burning to death. The ship kept tilting. 45 degrees. 60 degrees. I could hear the metal frame groaning, the fabric skin ripping. The windows that had offered such beautiful views of the ocean were now portals to hell. I could see fire reflected in the glass, could feel the heat intensifying. Smoke was starting to fill the passenger area. Thick, black, choking smoke. People were making impossible choices in split seconds. Jump and maybe die from the fall, or stay and definitely die in the fire. I saw a woman climb through a window and just let go. She fell screaming. The rear of the ship hit the ground with a massive impact. The whole structure shuddered, and suddenly we weren't falling anymore. We were sliding, the ship crumpling, breaking apart. This was my chance. I let go of the window frame and scrambled toward the nearest exit. The floor was tilted at a crazy angle, and debris was everywhere. Broken furniture, shattered glass, luggage spilling open. I stepped on something. Someone's hat, I think, and slipped. I fell hard, my shoulder slamming into a wall. Pain shot through my arm, but I couldn't stop. Behind me, I could hear the fire, could feel the heat getting more intense. I got back to my feet and kept moving. The smoke was so thick now I could barely see. I was coughing, choking, my eyes streaming tears. I put my arm over my mouth and nose and kept going. Then I saw it, a gap in the hull. The fabric skin had burned away, and there was a hole big enough to fit through. Beyond it, I could see grass, ground, blessed ground. We were down. The ship had crashed. I dove for the opening. I hit the ground hard and rolled. My shoulder screamed in pain, probably dislocated or broken, I couldn't tell. But I was out. I was outside the burning wreck. I scrambled to my feet and ran. Behind me, the Hindenburg was dying. The entire stern section was engulfed in flames, and the fire was racing forward, consuming everything. The metal framework was visible through the burning skin, like the skeleton of some prehistoric beast. People were everywhere. Passengers and crew, some running away from the wreck, some stumbling around in shock, some lying on the ground, not moving. The ground crew was rushing toward the ship, trying to help, but the heat was too intense. You couldn't get within 50 feet of it. I ran maybe 100 yards before I stopped and turned around. The Hindenburg, the majestic palace in the sky, the pinnacle of human engineering, the future of transportation, was a collapsing inferno. The nose section was still partially inflated, standing up like a monument for a few more seconds. Then it too collapsed, falling forward as the last of the hydrogen burned away. The whole thing, from that first muffled thump to the final collapse, had taken 37 seconds. 37 seconds to destroy something that had taken years to build. 37 seconds to kill 35 people. 37 seconds to end the era of passenger airships forever. I stood there, shaking, unable to process what I'd just experienced. Someone grabbed my arm, a Navy medic. "Sir, are you hurt? Sir, can you hear me?" I nodded. Couldn't speak. "Come on. Let's get you away from here. Let's get you checked out." He led me away from the wreck toward an area where other survivors were gathering. There were ambulances arriving, more medical personnel. I looked back one more time at the Hindenburg. It was just a smoking skeleton now, the aluminum framework glowing red-hot, the fabric skin completely gone. The fire was starting to die down, having consumed everything flammable. All that remained was wreckage and death. The scene at Lakehurst that night was chaos. Injured people crying out, doctors and nurses rushing between them, journalists pushing in, trying to get the story, newsreel cameramen filming everything. They took me to a makeshift triage area. A doctor examined my shoulder. Separated, not broken, thank God, and wrapped it up. He asked if I could breathe okay, checked me for burns. I had some minor burns on my hands and face from the heat, nothing serious. "You're lucky," he told me. "Very lucky." I didn't feel lucky. I felt numb, disconnected, like I was watching everything happen to someone else. They started bringing in the bodies. Not all of them. Some were too badly burned to move right away, but the ones they could recover, they laid out in a row, covered with sheets. I walked along that row, looking at the shapes under the sheets, wondering who they were. Was that Colonel Erdmann? Was that Hans, the young crew member who'd told me fire couldn't happen? Was that the banker's wife who'd said we were like gods? I never found out. Some of the bodies were identified, others never were. Final count: 35 dead. 13 passengers, 22 crew members, plus one member of the ground crew who got caught in the fire. 62 survivors. I was one of them. The newsreel footage of the disaster would become some of the most famous video in history. Herbert Morrison's radio commentary, especially his anguished cry of, "Oh, the humanity," would be replayed for decades. But what the newsreels couldn't capture was the smell, the overwhelming stench of burning rubber, fabric, and flesh. Or the sounds, the screaming, the groaning of dying metal, the roar of the fire. They couldn't capture what it felt like to know that you'd survived something that killed the people standing right next to you. The weird mix of guilt and relief. The knowledge that you'd been, as the doctor said, lucky, while others had been unlucky. Random chance, a few feet to the left or right, a few seconds faster or slower. That's all that separated the living from the dead. In the days and weeks after the disaster, everyone wanted to know why. What caused the fire? Was it sabotage? There were rumors, theories. The Hindenburg was a Nazi symbol, after all. Maybe someone had planted a bomb or caused a spark deliberately. Was it lightning? We'd flown through storms. Maybe a static discharge hit the ship at just the wrong moment. Was it the Hindenburg's outer covering? Some said the aluminum powder in the paint was flammable, that the skin burned like thermite. Or was it simply an accident? A tiny spark from static electricity igniting a small hydrogen leak and the whole thing going up in seconds. The official investigation ruled it an accident. Probably a hydrogen leak, probably ignited by static electricity during the landing approach. The weather, the moisture in the air, the landing procedure, everything combined in the worst possible way. But here's the truth. We'll never know for sure. The evidence burned up in the fire. The people who might have seen what happened in that first second, most of them died. We're left with theories, educated guesses, but no certainty. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe disasters don't always have neat explanations. Maybe sometimes chaos just happens, and we're left to pick up the pieces and try to make sense of it. What I do know is this. The Hindenburg disaster ended the era of passenger airships. Immediately, permanently, completely. There were a few more flights of other airships after 1937, but public confidence was shattered. Who would pay to fly in something filled with flammable gas after seeing the Hindenburg burn? Especially when regular airplanes were getting bigger, faster, safer. The Hindenburg disaster coincided with the rise of airplane travel. Within a few years, you could fly across the Atlantic in a Pan Am clipper. Not as luxurious as an airship, maybe, but much faster and, crucially, not filled with hydrogen. The age of the airship had ended. Not with a whimper, but with a spectacular, filmed, world-famous explosion. The physical injuries healed relatively quickly. My shoulder recovered, the burns scarred over. Within a couple months, I looked more or less normal, but the mental scars, those took longer. Are still there, actually. For years afterward, I had nightmares. I'd be back on the Hindenburg, feeling the ship tilt, seeing the fire spread, hearing the screaming. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, taking deep breaths to convince myself I was safe. I couldn't watch any footage of the disaster for decades. Even hearing Herbert Morrison's voice, "Oh, the humanity," would send me into a panic. Fire became difficult. Even controlled fires, like in a fireplace or a candle, made me anxious. I had to work through that, couldn't let it control me. But it took time. The survivor's guilt was perhaps the hardest part. Why did I live when so many others died? I wasn't braver than the people who died. I wasn't smarter. I wasn't more deserving. I was just luckier. Colonel Erdmann survived, but he was badly burned. We met up a few months after the disaster, and he told me he'd been trapped under debris, burning until rescuers pulled him out. He'd needed multiple surgeries, skin grafts. He'd lost 3 fingers on his left hand. But I'm alive, he told me. That's what matters. I'm alive. He never did take me to that steakhouse he'd promised. That young crew member, Hans? Dead. The banker and his wife? Both dead. Captain Pruss survived, but was so badly burned he needed months of recovery. Out of 97 people on board, 62 survived. You might think that's a good survival rate for such a catastrophic fire. But those 35 deaths, each one was a person, each one had a story, plans, people who loved them. You want to know what you learn from surviving something like the Hindenburg disaster? You learn that life is fragile. Unbelievably, impossibly fragile. You learn that all our technology, all our engineering, all our confidence in human achievement, it can be undone in 37 seconds. You learn that the difference between life and death is often just random chance. Being in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the wrong time. You learn to appreciate every single day. Every sunrise, every meal, every conversation with a friend. Because you know in your bones that it can all end in an instant. But you also learn that humans are resilient. We survive, we recover, we rebuild. After the Hindenburg disaster, humanity didn't give up on flight. We just changed direction. We built bigger airplanes, safer airplanes. We conquered the sky in a different way, and we learned. The lessons from the Hindenburg, about hydrogen safety, about disaster preparedness, about how to evacuate a burning aircraft. Those lessons saved lives in future disasters. Progress isn't a straight line. Sometimes it zigs and zags. Sometimes it takes a catastrophic failure to show us a better path. The Hindenburg was supposed to be the future. Instead, it became a cautionary tale, a reminder that hubris can be deadly, that we should never assume our technology is infallible, but also a reminder that even in the worst disasters, most people survive, that humanity has an incredible capacity to endure, to help each other, to carry on. As I'm telling you this story now, I'm one of the last survivors of the Hindenburg disaster. Most of the others are gone. Natural causes. Old age. The disaster was over 80 years ago, after all. I've spent the past 8 decades carrying these memories, telling this story to whoever will listen. Not because I enjoy reliving it, I don't. But because I feel like I owe it to the people who didn't make it. Someone needs to remember them. Someone needs to tell the real story, not just the newsreel version. Colonel Erdmann, who survived against all odds but lived the rest of his life with those scars. Hans, that young crew member so proud of his ship, so confident it was safe. The banker's wife, who thought we were like gods looking down at the storm. All the people whose names I never learned, whose stories I'll never know, but who shared those 3 days with me in the sky. They deserved better than to die in a fireball on a New Jersey landing field. They deserved to land safely, to see their families, to live their lives. But fate, or bad luck, or faulty engineering, or sabotage, or static electricity had other plans. And 35 people died in 37 seconds. Today, the Hindenburg is mostly remembered as a spectacular failure. A cautionary tale, a dramatic piece of newsreel footage, but that's not the whole story. Before it burned, the Hindenburg represented hope. It represented human ingenuity, ambition, the desire to conquer the impossible. It showed that we could build something magnificent, something that defied gravity and crossed oceans in comfort and style. For 3 days, I lived in that dream. I floated across the Atlantic Ocean in a palace in the sky. I watched sunsets from 500 feet up. I dined on fine china while suspended between earth and heaven. It was magical. And then it was hell. Both things are true. The Hindenburg was a triumph and a tragedy, a marvel and a warning. The wreckage of the Hindenburg was eventually cleared away from Lakehurst. The aluminum framework was salvaged, melted down, reused. The landing field is still there, though it's no longer used for airships. There's a small museum now, dedicated to the Hindenburg and the history of airships. I visited it a few times over the years. It's strange, seeing artifacts from the ship in glass cases. Bits of fabric, recovered pieces, photographs. It all seems so distant now, so long ago. But when I close my eyes, I'm back there. I can feel the ship tilting beneath my feet. I can hear the screaming, smell the smoke, feel the heat of the fire. 37 seconds that changed everything. You might be wondering why I'm sharing this story now. Why dig up these painful memories? Because I think every generation needs to hear it. We live in an age of incredible technology. We fly around the world in hours. We communicate instantly across continents. We've put humans in space, robots on Mars, computers in our pockets that are more powerful than anything the people on the Hindenburg could have imagined. And that's wonderful. That's progress. But we need to remember that technology can fail, that confidence can become hubris, that we should never assume we've conquered all the risks. The people who designed the Hindenburg were brilliant engineers. They thought they'd made it safe. They'd flown it across the ocean dozens of times without incident. And then, in 37 seconds, it was over. I'm not saying we should be afraid of progress. I'm not saying we shouldn't build, innovate, push boundaries. I'm saying we should do it with humility, with respect for how fragile everything is, with backup plans and safety measures and constant vigilance, because the alternative is 35 people dead on a New Jersey airfield. Sometimes people ask me if I regret boarding the Hindenburg that day in Frankfurt. It's a complicated question. Of course, I regret being in a disaster that killed 35 people. Of course, I wish I could have prevented it somehow, or at least warned people. But I can't regret the experience entirely. Those 3 days crossing the Atlantic were some of the most magical of my life. The wonder of floating above the clouds, the luxury, the sense of being part of something historic. And surviving the disaster taught me things about life, about resilience, about how precious every moment is. Lessons I might never have learned otherwise. So no, I don't regret it. I wouldn't choose to do it again if I had the option, but I don't regret it. It made me who I am. We are all, in some sense, the products of our experiences, both good and bad. The Hindenburg disaster is part of my story, a big part, maybe the biggest part, and now I've shared it with you. The next time you board a plane, take a moment to think about how remarkable it is. You're going to climb into a metal tube weighing several 100,000 pounds, and it's going to lift off the ground and fly you across the country or around the world. At 500 miles per hour, 7 miles above the earth, it's going to do this safely, comfortably, routinely. Millions of people do it every single day. It's a miracle. but it's a miracle built on thousands of lessons learned from failures. Every safety regulation, every backup system, every emergency procedure exists because someone, somewhere, learned a hard lesson. The Hindenburg is part of that story. One link in a long chain of human progress. Sometimes forward, sometimes backward, always learning. So remember the Hindenburg. Remember those 35 people who died. Remember that 62 survived, including me. Remember that progress has a cost, but giving up has a bigger one. And remember that on May 6, 1937, the age of airships ended not with a whimper, but with a roar of flame that lit up the New Jersey sky and changed the world forever. I was there. I survived. And now I've told you the story. Don't let it be forgotten. If you found this story compelling, if it moved you or taught you something, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I share stories like this. Real accounts from people who lived through historic events. Because I believe history isn't just dates and facts. It's human experience. It's stories that deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you thought. Tell me if you have questions about the Hindenburg or any other historical event you'd like me to cover. And share this video. Help make sure that the people who died on the Hindenburg and the people who survived aren't forgotten. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for keeping these stories alive. See you in the next one.